The heavy steel doors of Trauma Room 3 slammed shut, trapping a 28-year-old nurse inside with a snarling, blood-soaked Belgian Malinois. Outside, armed officers frantically demanded she open the door. Inside, she realized this supposedly vicious police dog wasn't trying to kill her. He was desperately trying to tell her something. The night shift at Westways Memorial Hospital usually settled into a dull, predictable rhythm by 2:00 a.m. The fluorescent lights overhead always hummed with a sterile, annoying buzz, and the smell of industrial bleach masked the metallic scent of copper that permanently stained the emergency room's trauma bays. Jocelyn Reed, a senior trauma nurse with 6 years of experience pulling people back from the brink of death, was nursing a lukewarm cup of black coffee at the central station. Outside, a torrential Seattle downpour lashed against the reinforced glass of the ambulance bay, mirroring the exhausted, dreary mood of the medical staff. Then, the red emergency phone on the desk shrieked. Charge nurse Brenda snatched the receiver, her posture stiffening instantly. "Westways ER, go!" A pause. Jocelyn watched the color drain from Brenda's face. "Understood. ETA?" Brenda hung up the phone and slammed her hand onto the code yellow alarm button. The shrill, piercing wail of the trauma klaxon shattered the quiet. "Listen up," Brenda shouted over the noise, her voice echoing down the sterile corridors. "We have a code yellow coming in hot. Officer down, multiple gunshot wounds. He's tachycardic, BP is crashing, and they are doing chest compressions in the rig. I need Trauma Room 3 prepped right now. Dr. Weber, your lead." Jocelyn tossed her coffee into the nearest trash can and sprinted toward Trauma Room 3, her muscle memory taking over. She ripped open sterilized packaging, spiked IV bags of O-negative blood, and readied the defibrillator pads. Dr. Philip Weber, a veteran trauma surgeon with a notoriously short temper, snapped on his latex gloves beside her. "What's the story?" Dr. Weber barked, arranging his intubation kit. "Gang unit raid gone bad down at the docks," Jocelyn replied, double-checking the suction lines. "Radio said it was an ambush." Before Dr. Weber could respond, the heavy automatic doors of the ambulance bay blew open. The screech of tires and the flashing wash of red and blue lights flooded the entryway. But over the chaotic shouting of paramedics and police officers, another sound sliced through the ER, a ferocious, guttural roar that rattled the windows. It was a dog, but it didn't sound like a normal dog. It sounded like a wild predator in the throes of absolute panic. A swarm of navy blue uniforms burst into the corridor, surrounding a bloody gurney. On the stretcher lay Sergeant Nolan Brody, his tactical gear shredded and soaked in dark arterial blood. Paramedics were straddling him, pumping his chest. But the chaos wasn't just about the dying officer, it was about what was attached to him. A massive Belgian Malinois, easily 80 pounds of pure muscle, dark fur, and razor-sharp teeth, was straining against a heavy leather leash, barking with such violent force that white foam flew from its jaws. The dog's chest was covered in Nolan's blood. It was fighting the 4 heavily armored officers trying to hold it back, its claws scrabbling and tearing at the hospital linoleum. "Get that animal out of here!" Dr. Weber screamed as the procession neared Trauma Room 3. "We cannot work with a live weapon in the bay." "We can't control him!" yelled Officer Mitchell, his boots slipping on the slick floor as he hauled back on the leash. "His name is Titan. He's Nolan's K9 partner. He won't let us near the sergeant." "I don't care if he's the mayor. Get him outside!" Weber roared. They transferred Nolan to the hospital bed with a synchronized heave. In that split second of transfer, the tension on Titan's leash slacked. The dog twisted with lightning speed, snapping its jaws inches from Officer Mitchell's wrist. Mitchell recoiled, dropping the heavy nylon loop. Titan was free. Panic erupted. Nurses screamed and scattered behind the nursing station. Orderlies scrambled over countertops. Titan didn't attack them. Instead, the massive dog bolted straight into Trauma Room 3, leaping entirely over a cart of surgical instruments and landing square in the middle of the room, right at the foot of Nolan's bed. Jocelyn was already inside, trapped between the heart monitor and the medical supply cabinets. Dr. Weber and the paramedics had instinctively backed out into the hallway when the dog lunged. "Get him out!" Weber yelled from the doorway. Officer Mitchell and another cop charged forward with a catch pole, trying to loop the dog's neck. Titan spun around, unleashing a snarl so demonic and loud it vibrated in Jocelyn's chest. The dog snapped at the metal pole, its teeth cracking against the aluminum. It lunged at the doorway, driving the officers and Dr. Weber back into the hall. In the chaotic scramble, someone bumped the heavy electronic release switch for the trauma doors. The thick, reinforced glass and steel panels slid shut with a definitive clunk, locking into their magnetic seals. Jocelyn stood frozen. The ambient noise of the ER was instantly muffled by the soundproof doors. The only sounds left in the room were the frantic, flatlining hum of the heart monitor, the heavy, ragged breathing of Sergeant Nolan, and the low, rumbling growl of the Malinois. She was completely alone in a locked room with an aggressively unhinged police dog and a man who was seconds away from dying. Jocelyn's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her back was pressed so hard against the stainless steel supply cabinet that the handle was bruising her spine. Just a few feet away, Titan stood on his hind legs, his front paws planted firmly on the edge of Nolan's blood-soaked mattress. The dog's head swiveled toward her. His ears were pinned flat against his skull, and his amber eyes were blown wide, completely swallowed by dilated black pupils. A continuous, vibrating growl rumbled deep in his throat, flashing incisors that could crush bone. Through the thick glass doors, Jocelyn could see absolute pandemonium. Dr. Weber was red in the face, screaming at the officers. Officer Mitchell was desperately slamming his shoulder into the door, trying to force the magnetic lock to disengage, but the override code was required from the central desk, and the system had frozen in the security lockdown triggered during the scuffle. Then, Jocelyn saw something that made her blood run cold. A SWAT officer had arrived outside. He assessed the situation, unholstered his sidearm, and stepped up to the glass. He was aiming directly at Titan's head, preparing to shoot through the reinforced window to save the medical staff and the dying sergeant. If he shoots through this glass, Jocelyn realized the bullet could ricochet, or the glass could shatter inward and kill Nolan. "No!" Jocelyn screamed, though she knew they couldn't hear her well through the heavy door. She violently waved her arms, crossing them in an X over her chest. "Do not shoot! Stop!" The officer paused, his finger hovering over the trigger. Dr. Weber pressed the intercom button on the wall outside. His voice crackled through the speaker above Jocelyn's head, sharp and commanding. "Jocelyn, stay completely still. Do not make eye contact with the animal. They are overriding the system in 90 seconds. Animal control is 3 minutes out with a tranquilizer." 90 seconds, Jocelyn thought, glancing at the monitor. Nolan's blood pressure was 60/40. His heart rate was a weak, fluttering 140 beats per minute. He doesn't have 90 seconds. He doesn't have 30. She looked at Nolan. The paramedics had managed to cut away his outer tactical vest, revealing a massive, gaping bullet wound in his upper left chest, just below the clavicle. Dark blood was pooling rapidly on the sterile sheets. But what terrified Jocelyn more was his breathing. His chest was rising unevenly, the right side puffing up while the left side remained sunken. Tension pneumothorax. Her brain diagnosed instantly. Air was trapped in his chest cavity, crushing his lungs and heart. If she didn't insert a needle into his chest to release the pressure right now, his heart would stop completely. "I have to work on him," Jocelyn said aloud, her voice trembling. She took a half step forward toward the medical tray. Titan whipped his head toward her, his growl escalating into a vicious, snapping bark. He abandoned his post at the side of the bed and planted himself directly between Jocelyn and Nolan's upper body. The dog lowered his center of gravity, ready to spring. Jocelyn froze, tears of pure adrenaline pricking her eyes. Okay, buddy, I'm stopping." The dog held his ground, his eyes locked on her hands. "Jocelyn, do not move!" Dr. Weber's voice crackled frantically over the intercom. "He will tear your throat out. Just wait." But Jocelyn couldn't wait. She was a nurse. A man was dying in front of her, and her oath demanded she do everything in her power to save him, even if it meant risking her own life. She took a slow, deep breath, trying to force the terror out of her system. Dogs could smell fear. They could sense a spike in cortisol. She needed to exude calm. She looked closely at Titan. Despite the terrifying display of aggression, there was something off about the dog's posture. When a dog is purely aggressive or resource guarding, they usually stand stiff-legged, making themselves as large as possible, targeting the threat's face or throat. But Titan wasn't doing that. Every time he barked at her, he would immediately glance back down at Nolan. And he wasn't just guarding the bed. He was guarding a specific spot on Nolan's body. Jocelyn tilted her head, observing the dog's frantic movements. Titan wasn't standing over the chest wound. He was standing near Nolan's waist, his heavy paws pressing down hard onto the thick, black fabric of Nolan's tactical cargo pants, right near the right thigh. Why is he standing there? Jocelyn wondered, her clinical mind cutting through the panic. The gunshot wound is on his chest. The paramedics said multiple gunshot wounds, but I only see one. Jocelyn slowly raised her hands, palms facing outward to show she held no weapons. Titan, she whispered. The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his name. The growling dropped a fraction of a decibel. She took another micro step forward. The dog didn't lunge. Instead, he whined a high-pitched, desperate sound that contrasted sharply with his terrifying appearance. He aggressively nudged Nolan's right leg with his snout, then looked at Jocelyn, barking once, sharply. It wasn't a warning bark. It was a demand. He's not keeping me away, Jocelyn murmured, a sudden, shocking realization washing over her. He's trying to show me something. Ignoring the frantic shouting from Dr. Weber over the intercom, Jocelyn took 2 confident steps forward. The SWAT officer outside raised his gun again, yelling something she couldn't hear. Titan didn't attack. As Jocelyn approached the right side of the bed, the massive dog actually took a step back, giving her space, though his body vibrated with nervous energy. He kept his snout pointed directly at Nolan's upper thigh. Jocelyn reached for the trauma shears resting on the cart. Titan watched her hand but made no move to bite. She leaned over the bed, grabbed the thick fabric of Nolan's blood-soaked cargo pants, and sliced upward. As the tough fabric parted, Jocelyn gasped. There, hidden beneath the dark, heavy material of the tactical uniform, was a catastrophic injury the paramedics had completely missed in the dark and rain. A bullet had shattered Nolan's femur and severed his femoral artery. Blood wasn't just leaking. It was pulsing out in a massive, hidden hemorrhage. The dark pants had masked the sheer volume of the blood loss. The chest wound was bad, but this was what was killing him so fast, and the dog knew it. Jocelyn looked at Titan's front paws. They were completely soaked in thick, red blood. The dog hadn't been standing on Nolan to guard him from the doctors. He was applying pressure. Titan had been trained in tactical canine casualty care. He knew his handler was bleeding out from the leg, and he had been using his own body weight to compress the artery, while the paramedics had mistakenly focused entirely on the chest wound. When they had loaded Nolan onto the gurney and tried to pull Titan away, they were pulling away the only thing keeping the sergeant from bleeding to death. The dog had fought so viciously because he knew if he let go, his handler would die. Jocelyn stared at the dog in absolute awe. The breath knocked out of her. Titan looked back at her, let out a soft, trembling whine, and nudged her hand with his wet, bloody nose, pushing her fingers directly toward the spurting artery. "Help him," the dog's eyes seemed to beg. Jocelyn snapped out of her shock. She dropped the shears and shoved both of her hands directly into the open wound, finding the severed artery and clamping her fingers down on it with all her strength. "I got it, Titan," she whispered, her voice choking with emotion. "I got him." Titan let out a long, heavy exhale, his tense muscles finally dropping. He slumped to the floor beneath the hospital bed, resting his chin on his bloody paws, exhausted but vigilant. Outside the glass room, the officers and Dr. Weber stood frozen, staring in absolute disbelief at what had just unfolded. But the battle for Nolan Brody's life was only just beginning. Jocelyn's fingers cramped almost immediately. The sheer hydraulic pressure of the human cardiovascular system was staggering, and she had to throw her entire upper body weight over Nolan's hip just to stem the torrential bleeding from his severed femoral artery. The blood was hot and slippery, making it a sheer physical battle to maintain her grip. Beneath the bed, Titan let out another low, vibrating whine, his amber eyes fixed intently on Jocelyn's blood-soaked hands. He knew she had taken over his watch. Suddenly, a heavy electronic chime echoed through the soundproof room. The magnetic locks on the reinforced glass doors disengaged with a loud click. The security override had finally gone through. The heavy doors slid open, and the trauma team flooded into the room like a tidal wave of blue scrubs and panic. Dr. Philip Weber was the first one through the threshold, holding a heavy-duty tranquilizer dart gun he must have grabbed from the arriving animal control officers. "Back away from the dog!" Dr. Weber shouted, raising the dart gun toward Titan. "No! Put it down!" Jocelyn screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. She didn't dare lift her hands from Nolan's leg. "He's not attacking. He was saving him. Weber, look at the leg. The paramedics missed the femoral bleed. The dog was applying direct pressure. Dr. Weber froze, his eyes darting from the exhausted dog resting peacefully under the bed to the catastrophic pool of blood forming around Nolan's lower half. The veteran surgeon's hardened expression shifted instantly from aggression to absolute shock. He lowered the dart gun and tossed it onto a nearby counter, shifting immediately back into his element. Dawson, get a tourniquet on that upper thigh, high and tight. Brenda, we need massive transfusion protocol initiated immediately. Bring me 4 units of O-negative, rapid infuser, now, Weber barked, snapping fresh gloves over his hands. Officer Mitchell and the SWAT team hesitated in the doorway, staring at the massive Belgian Malinois. Titan didn't growl, he didn't bare his teeth. As the medical team swarmed his handler, the intelligent canine simply army-crawled backward, tucking himself into the tightest, smallest corner of the trauma bay, completely out of the way of the frantic nurses and doctors. He kept his head flat on his paws, watching his partner with a heartbreaking intensity. Jocelyn, on 3, I need you to slide your fingers out so I can clamp the artery, Dr. Weber instructed, leaning over the shattered femur with a heavy pair of Kelly forceps. 1, 2, 3. Jocelyn pulled her hands back. In that fraction of a second, a geyser of dark crimson erupted, but Weber was faster. The metal teeth of the forceps snapped shut, clamping the severed vessel. The bleeding finally stopped, but the relief was incredibly short-lived. The cardiac monitor mounted on the wall suddenly let out a sustained, terrifying tone. The jagged green line representing Nolan's heartbeat flatlined. He's in traumatic arrest. Pulse is gone, Brenda yelled from the head of the bed, grabbing the crash cart. It's not just the blood loss. It's the tension pneumothorax, Jocelyn yelled, wiping a smear of blood from her forehead. The chest wound. His left lung is completely collapsed, and the trapped air is crushing his heart. I need a 14-gauge needle, right now, Weber demanded, holding his hand out. Jocelyn slapped the long, hollow needle into his palm. Without hesitating, Dr. Weber found the second intercostal space on Nolan's left chest and plunged the needle deep into the pleural cavity. A loud, sharp hiss echoed through the trauma room as the trapped air violently escaped, depressurizing the chest cavity. Starting compressions, Nurse Harrison announced, lacing his fingers together and driving them hard into Nolan's sternum. 1, 2, 3, 4. Push 1 milligram of epinephrine, Weber ordered. Brenda, squeeze those blood bags. We need volume in him, or there's nothing for the heart to pump. For 2 agonizing minutes, the only sounds in the room were the rhythmic thud of Harrison performing CPR, the mechanical whir of the rapid blood infuser, and the desperate, breathless silence of a team fighting the inevitable. In the corner, Titan let out a single, mournful howl, a sound so filled with sorrow that it sent shivers down Jocelyn's spine. Come on, Nolan, stay with us, Jocelyn whispered, grabbing the defibrillator paddles. Charge to 200! Charged! Brenda called out. Clear! Jocelyn shouted, pressing the paddles firmly to Nolan's bare chest. Nolan's body arched off the mattress as the electric shock ripped through him. Jocelyn stared at the monitor. Nothing, just a flat line. Resume compressions, Weber ordered, wiping sweat from his brow. Push another epi. Charge to 300. Jocelyn's heart sank. She had seen this too many times. When a trauma patient lost this much blood and went into arrest, the survival rate plummeted to almost 0. She glanced at Titan in the corner. The dog had buried his snout under his paws, trembling violently. Clear! Jocelyn shouted again, delivering the second shock. Nolan's body jolted. The room held its collective breath. On the monitor, the flat green line suddenly spiked. Then it spiked again. A weak, erratic rhythm began to march across the screen. We have a rhythm, Brenda gasped. I have a pulse. It's thready, but it's there. He's back, Weber exhaled heavily, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. Get him packaged up. We are moving to operating room 1 right now. We have to repair that artery and explore the chest cavity. Jocelyn, you're coming with me. As the team rapidly unlocked the bed and began rolling Nolan toward the surgical suites, Officer Mitchell stepped into the room with a heavy nylon lead, intending to secure the K9. Titan stood up, his amber eyes locking onto the moving bed. Mitchell approached cautiously, offering a closed fist for the dog to sniff. Titan ignored him completely. Instead, The dog looked directly at Jocelyn. He walked slowly toward her, his head lowered, and gently bumped his nose against her blood-stained scrub pants. "He knows you saved him," Mitchell said softly, astonished. "I've never seen this dog except a stranger. Ever." "Take care of him, Mitchell," Jocelyn said, her voice trembling as she turned to follow the surgical team. "He's the real hero tonight." The surgery lasted 7 grueling hours. Dr. Weber and the vascular team managed to graft a synthetic vein to repair Nolan's femoral artery, while the thoracic surgeon removed a fragmented 9mm bullet that had missed his heart by less than half an inch. By the time the morning sun began to pierce through the heavy Seattle clouds, casting a pale gray light over Westway's memorial, Nolan Brody was stabilized, but his fight was far from over. He was transferred to the surgical intensive care unit, placed on a ventilator, and induced into a medical coma to allow his severely traumatized body to heal. Jocelyn's shift had ended hours ago, but she found it impossible to leave. After scrubbing the dried blood from her hands and changing into a fresh set of navy scrubs, she walked down the quiet, sterile hallway toward the ICU. When she reached room 412, she stopped in her tracks. Sitting perfectly upright in the chair next to Nolan's bed was Titan. The hospital administration, in a highly unprecedented move, had bypassed every health code regulation in the book to allow the canine into the ICU. Officer Mitchell had argued that separating the heavily traumatized dog from his handler would cause severe psychological distress to the animal, and Dr. Weber, surprisingly, had backed him up, threatening to resign if the dog was removed. Titan's fur had been cleaned of the blood, and he wore a bright red service vest. As Jocelyn pushed the heavy glass door open, Titan's ears swiveled. He recognized her immediately. The massive dog hopped down from the chair, walked over to Jocelyn, and leaned his heavy body against her legs, letting out a soft sigh. "Hey, buddy," Jocelyn whispered, kneeling to stroke his head. "You doing okay?" Over the next 8 days, a profound routine developed. Jocelyn visited room 412 before and after every single shift. Titan never left the room. The local police precinct set up a rotation, bringing the dog food, water, and taking him for brief walks in the hospital courtyard, but Titan always rushed back to Nolan's side the moment he was unclipped from his leash. During those long, quiet nights, Jocelyn learned the true story of the raid from Officer Mitchell. It hadn't just been an ambush, it had been a coordinated trap. When the gang members opened fire, a heavily armed suspect had flanked Nolan. Titan had broken protocol, instinctively launching himself at the shooter to protect his handler. In the chaos, Nolan was hit in the chest, but he managed to return fire, neutralizing the threat before a second shooter aimed for the dog. Nolan had thrown his body over Titan, taking the second bullet to his leg to save his canine partner. They had saved each other. On the evening of the 9th day, a severe thunderstorm rolled through the city, rattling the windows of the ICU. Jocelyn was adjusting Nolan's IV fluids when she noticed a subtle change. The ventilator screen indicated that Nolan was initiating his own breaths, fighting the machine. "Dr. Weber," Jocelyn called out, pressing the call button. "He's waking up." Within minutes, the medical team had successfully extubated him. The room was tense, silent except for the rain lashing against the glass. Nolan's eyes fluttered, squeezed shut against the bright fluorescent lights, and finally opened. He looked disoriented, his breathing shallow and raspy. Jocelyn leaned in close. "Sergeant Brody, you're in the hospital. You're safe. You were injured, but you're going to be okay." Nolan swallowed hard, his throat raw from the breathing tube. His eyes darted around the room frantically, searching for something. His heart rate monitor began to beep rapidly, the numbers climbing into the danger zone. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. He weakly reached his hand out, blindly grasping at the edge of the mattress. "TTI." Nolan choked out. From the corner of the room, a familiar, joyful whine erupted. Titan didn't wait for permission. The massive Malinois scrambled up onto the edge of the bed, being incredibly careful to avoid the tubes and wires. He buried his large head gently into the crook of Nolan's neck, letting out a series of high-pitched whimpers that sounded almost human. Nolan's vital signs instantly stabilized. The frantic beeping of the monitor slowed to a calm, steady rhythm. The hardened police sergeant wrapped his weak, trembling arm around the dog's neck, burying his face in Titan's dark fur. Tears slipped down Nolan's face, soaking into the dog's coat. "Good boy," Nolan whispered, his voice cracking. "I got you, buddy. I'm right here." Jocelyn stood at the foot of the bed, wiping her own tears with the back of her sleeve. She had witnessed countless medical miracles in her career. She had seen advanced technology bring people back from the dead. But as she watched the unbreakable bond between the man and the dog who had refused to let him die, she realized that the strongest medicine in the world wasn't found in a syringe or a surgical suite. It was found in loyalty. 2 months later, Nolan Brody walked out of Westways Memorial Hospital on crutches, wearing his dress uniform. By his side, trotting proudly in step, was Titan. The hospital staff lined the hallways, erupting into applause as the duo made their way to the exit. Jocelyn stood at the front of the crowd. As Nolan passed her, he stopped, reached out, and pulled her into a tight embrace. Titan sat patiently, looking up at Jocelyn with those familiar amber eyes, offering a single, soft bark of gratitude. They had walked into the hospital surrounded by chaos and death, but they were leaving it together, completely inseparable, having survived the unimaginable, because a fiercely loyal K9 knew exactly what it meant to hold the line. If you were on the edge of your seat reading about Titan's incredible heroism and Jocelyn's quick thinking, don't keep this amazing story to yourself. Please hit that like button, share this video with every dog lover and true hero fan you know, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most heart-pounding, unbelievable real-life stories every single week. Ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the next dramatic twist.
Hi, my name is Tran Tan, the owner and manager of Noble Tales. After watching the video, "They left the nurse alone with an aggressive service canine. What happened next left everyone speechless." I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me was how patience, understanding, and calm can sometimes reach where fear and judgment cannot. Stories like this remind us that taking a moment to understand someone, or even an animal, can make all the difference. Which part of this story had the biggest impact on you? Have you ever seen trust built in a way that surprised you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more meaningful stories.